sticker.
Okay.
Bill 10, which turned legislation 1611,
This is Alberta legislation?
Alberta legislation, that's the gay straight alliance where kids don't have to tell their parents that they're going to go to whatever club. That goes against Alberta's charters of rights. And the people who put that in about a day were the conservatives. So we only...
Some people would say the Tories.
Okay. So the point would be that, yes, it's fun to pick on the NDP, and they've done enough things to tick everybody off as of late. But the people who started this bandwagon were provincial conservatives, and how would you manage that relationship, and how would federal policies filter down to the provincial level if they can?
Boy, that's an excellent question. You got to understand, I come from Saskatchewan.
I know.
Life is a lot less, look, it used to be, I grew up in an area of Saskatchewan where the nickname was Red Square. The ridings were square, and because it was so left-wing in its voting habit, it was compared to Red Square in Russia. Let me make a couple observations. When I talk about parental bill of rights or conscience legislation, again, my technical resource law professor friend, I've run it past him to make sure it would actually meet the separation of powers between the federal and the provincial government's test. He says it would, and he gives explanation that the federal government can protect civil liberties, even in areas of provincial jurisdiction. I have to say, a conservative party led by me, I think would have its biggest impact. If it was successful, it would be imitated. If it was not successful, it probably wouldn't. And that's the one observation I would make. I will say this, from outside of outside of Alberta, different people are taking very different interpretations of what's happened for you guys to actually elect the NDP here. People are blaming different things, they're saying different people were responsible, and there's no actual consensus. I don't know if there is in the province, but there's no actual consensus outside the province how you got to your problems where you are here. So I don't know, but I will say this, if you're successful, people do imitate you. And I think it's important to say, and be honest, you maybe don't always do it right at the time, but to be fairly candid when you do an assessment about what worked and what didn't. You heard me refer with, I forget who asked the question now, about the Saskatchewan Tories back in the 82 to 91 period. They sometimes got enamored with mega projects with government money, and they never worked. They never worked. Look, I was a card-carrying member of the Saskatchewan Progressive Conservatives, and I'm willing to say that. One of my political mentors was one of Grant Devine's senior cabinet ministers. I was willing to say that years later, too. So you have to be willing to go back and say what didn't work, even on your own side of the spectrum. But yeah, I really don't know, other than the fact that if you're successful, people do imitate you. So I'm very much hoping to be successful. The one thing that's being observed in Ontario right now, their provincial leader, even though he's way ahead in the polls, he has a practical civil war going on in his party. Because first of all, he burned the social conservatives, and then he announced he was in favor of a carbon tax. And you've got to understand, we actually did some research on this through the campaign. We thought Alberta would be the place most opposed to carbon taxes in Canada, if not Ontario. Because once you've seen their hydroelectricity bills, what that's happened in the last couple of years, that lady from Peterborough who's paying almost $1,000 a month in electricity, okay? They heat their houses, but we do natural gas out here. Some of the places they use electricity out there. It is unreal what the people are saying. So anyways, when Patrick said we're going to have some version of a carbon tax as the provincial Tories, he had his own MPPs flipping out. I've seen Conservative Party staffers openly dumping on him at events, and I'm like totally shocked. Like, you wouldn't dump on the boss, but they were. And so if you don't stick to principles, you're going to blow yourself up. And he's already caused himself a mess, and he hasn't even got elected. Now, I kind of think he's still going to win the election, almost in spite of himself. He's already got a mess in his hand, and he is a year away from the election. So those are just observations. So, okay, we're going to go back here. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sure.
So my question is back to the strategy again. I understand you have 3 types of strategy to win the election.
3 basic principles, yeah.
Yeah, but this election is so critical, so I would think there would be some creative or double insurance strategy to make Conservative Party to win. So by saying that, I just to try to be creative. Shall we audit the money flow?
Look,
Just
yeah.
send over to the C. How do we manage CBC? Those kind of questions. So my question, are you going to hire a professional champion team if you win the leadership?
Yeah, you very much have to. Most of you in the room won't know this, but historically the Conservatives in Canada have had very strong ties with the Australian Liberal Party, which is the right-wing party down there. I know it's strange to our ears. But we have not, as compared to the Liberals, tapped into the American political resources as much as the Liberals have. The same software that the Obama operation was used by the Liberals against us last time. And we've been a little bit reluctant to get involved with Republicans in the States for two reasons. Their technology and stuff, because the American political technology is world-class. It is always the best. They have way more money, way more everything than everyone else, both the Democrats and the Republicans. We've been reluctant for two reasons. One, we don't want to get branded as just sort of the next-door neighbor, sort of, puppets of George W. Bush or whoever happens to be now, it's Trump, etc. So I understand a little bit of the concern there. The second reason, the progressive Conservatives in Ontario, not in the West, tended to have United Empire loyalist roots, very much so. And that always made them reluctant to deal with the Americans. And it's funny, something that as a Western Canadian doesn't make sense to me, but it always caused them to be reluctant. Where does this impact the party? If we want the best analytics, if we want the best resources for social media, we have to go down to the States and find the people who are absolutely the best. Now, my team, we just couldn't afford them. We actually looked at guys who had worked with the Ted Cruz operation in the States. They're some of the absolutely best analytics guys, and if you saw the operations, they ran the best. So regardless of who takes over, our party needs to go fully professional, and if that means dealing with the best vendors possible in the United States for political technology, we need to do that. If that means we need to upgrade our social media skills, which we do, the party is currently working on that, we need to do that. We need to have as professional an operation as we possibly can. We were beating the Liberals in that for a couple election cycles. This last one, they jumped ahead of us, and we need to get back ahead of them on that. So it's all hands on deck, full war for whoever wins this leadership race come May 28th. Okay, I hope that answers. I don't know if it was, but as someone who's been involved in 17 election campaigns, trust me, it'll be very professional. So, and there'll be a lot more money behind it than my current campaign. So, okay, the gentleman there, and then we'll go to the. We're working our way back there, and then I'll come back to see who I missed over here.
Mr. Trost, could you explain what's the daily life of an MP right now, or it should be? And,
what's the daily life of an MP?
Yeah, and what's the milestone to become a national leader?
And what's my what?
Milestone? What steps?
Milestones, what steps? Daily life of a member of parliament. It depends. If you're in Ottawa, you get up and you generally start with some meeting of the day. Breakfast meetings are fairly common. It could be everything from meeting with a diplomat if you're involved in some foreign relations or foreign committee. You end up doing usually a committee spell, unless you're a cabinet minister, which I've never been. So you'll do committee for 2 hours a day, twice a week, and you have to prepare for that. Look through your material, do your reading, because you're going to have legislation or a report that you're working on. You tend to have a variety of people coming in to talk to you about legislation. My office, we've always tried to slot them on 1 day a week to get them all done in a row, 30 minutes in and out, 30 minutes in and out. So if you're from Saskatchewan, I get the Stock Growers Association, Canadian Petroleum Producers may be in. The chiropractors were in the other week. They had some really good points about pain control and dealing with the opiate drugs. So you'll do that. You'll go and you'll spend an hour in question period. If you're in opposition, you've probably submitted some questions and you may be up to grill the government on that. If you're in government, well, you sit there for a bored hour twiddling your thumbs, listening to people answer questions. And that's what you do. In the evening, your staff will sometimes put out a list of people for you to phone, who maybe they built up for 3-4 days, and so you'll spend a certain amount of allotted time on the phone. When you're doing constituency stuff, what you tend to do is spend a lot of time going out to meet with people. Now, if it's the summertime, it's wonderful, because you get to do things like strawberries and ice cream, or barbecues, and that qualifies as work. Every MP knows what the summer is for. You have meet and greets for your constituents, and it qualifies as work. And out comes the barbecue, and away you go, and your volunteers. I do a lot of citizenship ceremonies in my riding. I speak at those on a regular basis. When we were in government, we would sometimes have to do government funding announcements. Media interviews tend to happen on a regular basis. And you sometimes just have to do administration. When I have constituents who want to meet with me personally on casework, issues with immigration, issues with Canadian revenue. We no longer have agriculture because my riding changed, but I would have to deal with those every so often. So you do a full variety of things. Sometimes high school students, elementary schools ask you in to talk. So it's a busy life. On occasion you do some overseas travel. That's rare unless there are certain people, but it's a full variety. I've done everything from tour a nuclear power plant to go down a mine in my job as an MP. So, okay, and
what's your milestone?
well, milestones? I guess for an MP, every election's a milestone, and I've had 5 of them now? I've lost track. 5 elections, so every election is a milestone. Sorry.
Oh, I mean the milestone to elect you become the national.
To elect to become the next leader?
Yeah.
Well, we've got the debates. The votes come out after April 28th. Go down on your ballot. The last one alphabetically is your first choice. The last shall be first. The little corner. Circle in a little one for me there. And then we'll wait to see what the counts are. Look, we had very good success as far as membership selling. Our membership sales were literally in the tens of thousands. So we have really good support from coast to coast. It's really well spread out. We have some clumps of support in Toronto, Vancouver, and on the western side of Montreal. But by and large, our support tended to have been spread out quite well. So those are sort of where we're going as we go forward.
So could you just clarify, it's not a big question, clarify that thing of putting the vote, because there was something in the paperwork about your first, but if it went to the second...
That's correct. You can vote for up to 10 candidates in this leadership race, okay? So you get to vote for your first choice, but if nobody wins on the first ballot, and think of it as this, there's 14 candidates, and we all get some votes. So what they do, think of this as an imaginary room where they have 14 piles of paper. Whoever has whoever's first vote, whoever has the smallest pile of paper, we take that pile of paper, we flip open the ballots, and we cross his or her name off, and then we look for their number 2. Then we put those on the other 13 ballots to see who's got the highest pile of papers. Then we do that again. Whoever's got the lowest pile, we take them off, flip them over, and see who the highest candidate is of the names we haven't stroked off. And then you do it again until someone has a pile of papers that's equivalent to half of them. They have the majority. So it's probably a very good idea not just to vote for one candidate, but to vote for a few candidates. Okay? What a large number of people have been suggesting is you divide the candidates into 3 piles. The ones I like, the ones I'm okay with, and the ones I dislike. Okay? So it doesn't matter who you're voting for first, second, and third. This is a general advice, and all the campaigns have been giving this out. If you really don't like the candidate, and you can't stand him, like if you don't like me, I'll be hurt, but I'll understand. There's some people who don't vote for me under any circumstance. So if you dislike, and some people have 2 or 3 or 4 candidates they don't like, don't vote for them. Even if there's room on the ballot, don't vote for them. It doesn't make any sense. For all of the candidates that you kind of like, it makes sense to vote for all of them in some order. Okay? So if you do like me, in my campaign, we are recommending Pierre Lemieux as a second choice because he's recommending us as a second choice. So we're very much supportive of each other. So if you like me and you like Pierre, you would put me as number 1, Pierre as number 2. I don't know, who would you like next? Just pick a name randomly so I don't choose. Just pick some of it. So let's pick Max. Say you like Max. You may or may not, but we'll say Max. You would pick Max as number 3. Is there a 4th candidate who you would happen to like? Say Andrew, okay? There's 2 Andrews, so we'll go with Sheer, okay? So Sheer. So those are the 4 candidates you happen to like, okay? Me, Lemieux. So you'd go 1, 2, 1 for me, Lemieux 2, Bernier 3, and Sheer 4. If that's how it is. Now you may have it different. You may have Sheer 2, you may have Bernier 4, whatever it is. But that's just an example, okay? Do that for all the candidates you like. Now, if there's a bunch of candidates that you're sort of, you could mark them in, particularly if you think they have some sort of chance at winning or are perceived to be a candidate that has even sort of a chance of winning. My advice for those candidates, put them in, okay? Most of the ones. You don't have to. You may or you may not. I'll give an example. I like Deepak, but he would be in sort of my category. Because Deepak's not really running to win, he's running to make a point, he's a great guy. So Deepak isn't one of the candidates that I would say under no circumstance would I vote for. I'd vote for him, you know, under a certain circumstance. But Deepak, in my perspective, is not really running to be a serious leader of the party. He's running to make a point, get known and stuff. He's a great guy. So he's in my sort of my category, okay? Now, if I thought Deepak was the key and could be one of the candidates I dislike, I would mark Deepak in on my ballot as my final vote, as a just in case. So that's what people are recommending. Definitely vote for the ones you like. If you think there's a chance that one of the candidates you really detest could win, then you should probably vote for some of the candidates that you're sort of like, meh, about. And that's frankly what all the campaigns have been advising when they've been giving nonpartisan advice. We're all saying vote for us as number 1. But that's probably the easiest way to do it. Now, the other way of doing it that some of the campaigns are saying is figure out what your 1 or 2 or 3 most important issues are. What are the things you really care about? Because some things you care about less than others. It's interesting watching Blaney and Bernier talk supply management all the time, okay? I'll be honest, it's not the biggest issue in the world for me. I could live with Steve and I could live with Max's policy both ways, okay? I think they both have points, okay? But I'm never going to vote my ballot on supply management, okay? I suspect most people in Calgary won't either. Some will, some won't. So that may not be important. Perhaps their stand on immigration policy is really important to you. So do that. So pick your 1 or 2 most important issues and see which are the 3 candidates which most closely align with those. That's another good way of organizing your ballot as well. Okay. Are we finished with that question? Can I go to the lady at the back or not?
Okay.
Okay, I'll go back because I'm going to be here a long time, so go ahead.
Okay, you mentioned about what's the issue we care most. The issue we care most is economy.
Okay.
So we want to know what's your vision about economy countrywide and Alberta-wide.
The number 1 thing I would do the moment I became Prime Minister, and I've said this before, the big project I would do is comprehensive reform of our tax system. Based on the underlying principles that lower rates are better and simpler is better. I wouldn't be able to get it all down to a 1-page form. I looked at that as a policy proposal. But what we would do is we would, in the first 2 years, guarantee income tax cuts for every Canadian in every bracket as we get a simpler, lower, flatter tax system. That would actually be one of the positive economic levers to actually boost people up through the system. We do that for personal income tax, we do that for corporate income tax, and make sure every Canadian got a tax. And you do that by somewhat eliminating things that are known as tax expenditures, I'm not aiming to get rid of all of them, but I would do that to some degree, and that would simplify and lower brackets all across. It's known as supply theory when it comes to economics. Very simple across the board. Do the same thing on corporate tax. Now, my corporate tax plan is modeled on a little bit of work that Jack Mintz has done here as a University of Calgary tax professor. He pointed out that if we just got rid of some of the loopholes in our corporate tax system, we could drop from a federal rate of 15 to between 12 and 13 without costing a penny, and would actually have a positive economic boost. So my number one thing, comprehensive tax reform. I would match that with, as I said earlier, cutting spending for things such as the CBC. Different people define corporate welfare differently, so I have a target as far as how much I would get, because I don't think you can quite do 100% of it. It would be a little bit politically difficult for our Atlantic Canadian MPs to swallow as much as they know it's good policy. So I would start to roll those things systematically into our tax code. That would be my number one financial fiscal thing, because when you look at what the federal government can control on the economy, it's fiscal policy. You have two levers for economic growth: monetary policy, which is run by the central banking system, and fiscal policy, which is essentially how you spend your money. And how you spend your money influences how people act in the economy. Your friend was talking about how many things are being put on top of her. She's actually creating and making wealth. And yet we have the system where we penalize people who do that. So, my economic platform in totality is probably fairly similar to Bernier's. Him and I are fairly close. Him and me have a lot of overlap on our economics. So a fairly aggressive tax cutting strategy is what I would do as far as my overall economic strategy. Does that help? Nope.
Why I mind more about diversify. How have you any idea about economy diversify, especially Alberta?
But the way you diversify is you don't actually spend money to do it. You get out of the way of blocking people on what they do. This is one of the things. Alberta actually, when you start to do some of the economic measures, has more diversified economy than most other Canadian provinces. I know you think that that's a little bit strange because we're such an oil and gas province here, okay? Alberta actually has a more diversified economy on service industries, on IT industries, than all of Atlantic Canada, much of Quebec, and Saskatchewan as well. Saskatchewan is much more dependent. This is one thing you guys in Alberta may not quite grasp. When you travel to Atlantic Canada, you're sometimes shocked about how much poorer they are than you guys are in Alberta, okay? This is one thing. I know you're going through a recession here. I lived here as a kid and I saw the National Energy Program, how it wreaked havoc here. But Alberta is much more diversified than it has been. And it does it by not getting the government picking winners and losers. I could go back through some history. So I know it's difficult to do, but if you pull back, you actually get more diversification than if you pick winners or losers. And every conservative candidate, I think, in this leadership race would at least acknowledge the principle of what I'm saying is right. So